Okay. Hi, everyone. On today's podcast, I have a special guest with me, a fellow coach. His name is Nerijus, and he is one of the people that actually was transformative in a pretty rocky period of my life. And I wanted to bring him on because I've been following his posts lately, and he has been talking about the things that we struggle with, all of us struggle with, but in a really unique way. And that was actually one of the reasons why I hired him as my coach to begin with. But today we're going to be talking about what everybody's interested in, which is the question, how do we get ourselves to do the things that we want and need to do when we want and need to do them? And so I really like the way that Nerijus talks about procrastination. There's multiple factors involved. And I really think just having an open and different conversation around that can kind of bring some new insights into our awareness that maybe then we can use in our own lives to help ourselves with those things. So Nerijus, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for being on. And could I ask you just to kind of introduce yourself and to talk about what you love to do in terms of coaching?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, first of all. Coaching grew out as a from my own personal passion and interest in psychology, in spirituality, and in neuroscience. I was eating that whole thing up for many years, probably 15 years already now, and I heavily invested in this myself. I utilize it myself in my everyday life, and for many years I've utilized it. So it grew out of that, first of all. And I would say maybe in terms of a short introduction is that I definitely believe in the power of coaching, but I would say that I'm a bit of a hybrid in a sense that I do believe there's tremendous value in the principles of coaching, but I also kind of think that I'm a bit of a trainer in a sense, because I think that a lot of development is actually achieved through a systematic training of your brain, of your mind, of conditioning yourself in a certain way. And I think that combination of these two factors is what interests me the most. And to me personally, it seems the most efficient way to do it, as far as I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm actually really glad that you brought that up, because when you talk about trainer, we know instantaneously kind of what that brings to mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your Instagram handle is Rewired, is right? Rewire your mind.
Yeah, so rewired minds. It's been multiple names.
Okay. But the whole concept is rewiring, basically unlearning, challenging and unlearning, and then rewiring for a different way of being that's, like you said, more efficient, right?
Yeah, and I think this stems from the fact that the science of the brain, the newest neuroscience, is the observation that the brain has a plasticity to it, neuroplasticity basically, and that's the way that it functions. It adapts to the situations that are happening around it, whether internally or externally. So the logic being, from my perspective, is that, okay, then we need to create those situations so that it starts adapting to those situations. And by doing that, we can rewire it. So the brain rewiring itself is just a basic scientific fact now. And what I'm interested in mainly, there's actually a term for that, which is self-directed neuroplasticity. So that instead of just sort of waiting for the fortunate opportunities and situations to occur in life, you start sort of a conditioning and training yourself specifically so that you create that effect of development of your brain. And I think that can be a way to go if you want to train your brain in a certain direction. Yeah.
I think that a lot of people that are listening to this, I think we've heard about neuroplasticity, at least the people in our circles, right? But the self-directed part, I think, is something that we don't necessarily hear as part of the normal vernacular. But man, I think that is the part that people really, if they hear, when you hear you talking about it, would get their ears to perk up, right? I mean, that is kind of what it means to be autonomous. We all talk about like wanting autonomy, right? But autonomy includes not just like in the external workplace, et cetera, or external life experiences. It also includes, autonomy in our own brain. basically. Like, how free are we in the way that we think, in the way that we can bring awareness to how we're feeling and how those are actually impacting whether we're able to experience our life the way that we want. And so self-directed neuroplasticity suggests that we can look at ourselves and kind of say, you do a diagnostic check and invite ourselves to say, where are we right now? Where would we like to be? And where are gaps that we can improve on intentionally, like the self-directed part that you're talking about. So I love that you talk about it that way, because I honestly feel like that's actually what people are starving for. Would you agree?
Yeah, but it's I think, and the reason why I say trainer and all that is I think the biggest misconception, at least from my experience, about how mental development, mind development, brain development works in general, is that we're over relying on like waiting for the intellectual realization, like, oh, I want to, love myself more, be more confident, do this, and we try to rationalize our way into it. Like, how do I make myself believe this? And then we try to use logic to deduce whatever thing that we want to. But from my experience, it doesn't seem that we as human beings are this robotic mind, which when you think about it, I think that's probably how it is. We are a combination. We have the rational mind, we have the capacity to analyze, but at the same time, we are a conglomerate of emotions and feelings and associations and so on and so forth. And everything that we do is based on those feelings and associations and so on and so forth. We can ignore them, but I don't think that changes anything. And training then becomes part of realizing that not everything is meant to be rationalized. I am greatly inspired by all kinds of properly esoteric traditions, in the sense that they're very heavily actually on like training, many years of doing something again and again and again. And I think there's a reason for that, is that part of this is just a reconditioning of yourself. It doesn't need to be some grand realization, even though those come. But part of it is just about learning to relax yourself. Part of it is just about learning to just focus on certain things in a sort of a mastery of the fundamental skills, the fundamental skill of relaxation, the fundamental skill of, well, basically upregulation or downregulation. And I think a lot of answers can come when you just start looking at those very basic fundamentals, instead of trying to rationalize all the time. Because sometimes it has its uses, but it also has its limitations, from my experience.
Yes, I think we can definitely talk ourselves or think ourselves in circles, and then we become exhausted. And I wonder, one of the reasons why I reached out to you in the beginning, I mean, you said so many really interesting things there, but I think one of the reasons why I thought it would be great to have you on was because you had a post recently about procrastination. And I know that we could just hop on the internet and find out lots of different techniques, and there's a lot of valid techniques, and there's a lot of techniques that really work. But if we were to have a bigger conversation about procrastination and really kind of get to what it actually is, what's actually happening, so that sometimes that's our greatest insight, is when we can actually slow ourselves down and say, what's actually happening here, instead of just saying, oh, I'm procrastinating, or I'm a procrastinator. And the post that you had recently talked about a couple different things. And definitely the discipline of mastering when you get out of your own head and start approaching it from a different way, to really cut out so much of what we actually think we need to do to overcome procrastination, right? And one of the things you talked about is definitely could be a need for more clarity in like your vision or your goals, which I could definitely see that as well. If we don't know where we're going, of course, we're going to kind of spin in circles, and our brain is confused. And when our brain is confused, it tends to then spin out, and there is no direction there. but also you mentioned the ability to actually tap in and see what's going on in your body. I know there's a lot of talk about polyvagal theory and nervous system regulation, but I'm wondering, with especially your training, you've been doing this kind of stuff for years now. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by, let's start with taking a look at the tapping into the body and maybe out of the head in terms of procrastination?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned in that post, I outlined basically two directions, one which is clarity, another which is the sort of noticing what is happening with your body. From my experience, and I think anyone, when you think about it, can relate to that. A typical theoretical example would be whatever you're experiencing right now. Imagine the situation where you are procrastinating and so on and so forth. If you could, like that, just get into the zone of complete relaxation, where you're no longer stressed, you're no longer agitated in any way or shape or form, would that place be a better starting point to get into action? And from my experience, well, obviously, because then you're not wasting any energy, you're not distracted, you're neutral in a sense. And when you're neutral, then you can actually go into action way easier. So this part especially is definitely related to what I mentioned before, the training element, the conditioning element. I have spent countless, probably thousands and thousands of hours meditating or doing all kinds of passive active meditations, breathwork, yogas, and all of that. And I do have to say, this is one area where maybe different people are born with different capacity to self-regulate, different upbringing, different circumstances, obviously instill certain capacities. But this is one area where it seems that just pure conditioning and pure training of that skill, as a fundamental skill, comes into play. And the more you sort of train that, the more you teach your body that you are capable of relaxing, of calming down, even if it's not like 100% reliable, because nobody is a robot. So obviously, that maybe that's unrealistic, except for gurus or someone, but that is sort of the goal. Understanding that it is a skill set. First of all, it's not something that you do once. It's a thing that you introduce into your life. And when you introduce it over the long term, you become capable of sort of cycling out of these activity and passivity cycles. In other words, when you're capable of really relaxing, then your capacity to really do something, which is the planning element, the other thing that I mentioned, which is sort of a completely different. But when you're able to tap into that relaxation, you're able to jump into action in a way more efficient manner. So, yeah, maybe that answers your question, maybe not.
You did. And actually, you mentioned two terms that I find really interesting, that actually really helps articulate what we actually go through when we're stuck in a cycle of let's just say procrastination, right? And so you mentioned activity and passivity. And I think if you even look at it that way, number one, it gives language other than I'm procrastinating, right? It helps you stay out of the judgment zone. It can be more of an observance zone, what's actually going on here, right? But also, it ties into when you talk about the different elements of the brain actually that are even activated, right? So if we're procrastinating, what often accompanies procrastination, right? It is that overwhelming bodily sense that where you mentioned before, energy is being expended, but it's inward, right?
Exactly.
And when all the focus and energy, all that stuff is going on inward, I imagine there's a different part of the brain that's actually being activated. And the planning, the seeing if there's clarity of vision and goals, being able to tap into that part, it's difficult when we're in the activated state, right? Which is in the different part of our brain. Sometimes I feel like I really want to introduce a lot more visuals in my coaching, like drawings of the brain. So I need to learn how to draw a brain. But it can pinpoint, this is where it's activated here. But what you want to be doing in order to get to what, to performing the task at hand, let's just say, is and so we can't even get here because you're stuck here and just pointing to the different parts of the hand-drawn brain. And And instead of, like you said, instead of us going into, let's say, thoughts and all that work, it's like, how do we get from here to here? Well, first, let's address here
Yeah.
would you elaborate a little bit more on that? Does that make?
Yeah, that makes, that's a very good very good elaboration on what I said, because people think that procrastination is not doing something. I mean, if you really look at it and become aware, you're obviously doing something. You're just doing other things to sort of distract you from it, even if it's just scrolling or just looking out the window. And there's usually some inner conflict happening at the same time, because you kind of know that you should be doing something and you don't. Overall, my biggest observation over the more than a decade of experience of meditating, and then the past years or whatever working with other people, is that the capacity to relax, truly relax, and sort of get neutral is something that is way more rare than people assume. It's not just because, oh, you turn on some TV and you zone out or whatever. I would characterize proper relaxation is when you truly sort of notice the difference between the chatter of the mind and the images coming into your mind, and the fact that you are that different observer that is observing all those actions. And that is at the core of almost any kind of meditative or even quote unquote spiritual practice, is discovering the difference between the ego and the observer. That is getting into a bit of a different topic as well, but it is part of it. Proper relaxation is a kind of a stability where you're no longer being moved, or at least not moved to the degree that you were, by the random thoughts coming into you. So then you become centered. And when you're that centered, and you do that as a practice, and you know how to get there at least sometimes, then that can become a new ground for action. Because on one hand, the more you practice this, the more wasted energy you start regaining. So psychologically, you start feeling fresher, basically. And you can then utilize that energy for new action. So it is a bit of a rerouting your internal ecosystem in that sense.
Yes. That reminded me of one of the videos that you recently posted, which was about the anchoring. Like, a lot of times our brain actually just doesn't have context because it's very familiar with what it's always done.
Yeah.
And so if something, for example, if part of procrastination is because you're overwhelmed, let's just say, and your tendency and your habitual pattern is, when you're overwhelmed, to do certain things, including talking about how overwhelmed you are, and then doing the normal buffering strategies to relieve yourself of feeling the inner conflict or the, what's going on in your inner world because you're overwhelmed, you follow the same patterns. But you're talking about when you can bring awareness to that and make a different choice, and then practice getting to the state of, well, first of all, choosing that you want to actually experience life differently, including when there are things that might make you overwhelmed in the past. Like, how would you like to be? How do you want to handle that differently, so that, like you said, it can't, because you can obviously tap into neuroplasticity, but that does require intentional choice, well, awareness of what you're creating if you don't do anything, and then choosing to create a different experience for yourself, but then recognizing that in order to do so, it is going to require the discipline or the mental practice over and over, so that you can, reroute or rewire a new way of being in response to stress or overwhelm. Is that right?
Yeah, and especially in terms of anchoring, I really want to clarify one thing, because I know this will sound probably weird to people who maybe haven't experienced it, but from my experience, that's exactly what works, and is that when we're talking about anchoring, there's many different contexts for that. But let's say in this case, let's talk it from the context we talk procrastination. So one part is the ability to relax, so sort of a down-regulate yourself, and the other, like you mentioned, sort of a clarity. But when we're talking about clarity, sure, there's the again, the intellectual clarity, like what do I want to do with my life and so on and so forth. This job is good, this job is bad. The rationalization, that is important. But what is sometimes a lot of people, they know what they have to do. They know that
Yes.
they have to hit the gym. They know they have to start studying. So the logic, the rationale is there, and yet they're not doing it.
Mm.
When it comes to anchoring and why that's important is that we have to recognize that everything that we do, we don't just do it because it's rationally good for us. We do it because it makes us feel a certain way. So I go to the gym because it has a certain emotion associated with it. I go to the job because obviously there's the need to make money, but there's also the paralyzing fear of what if you don't make money, right? Or what about the ambition to make a lot of money, et cetera, et cetera. So if we look at this and we look at it from the training angle and from a rewiring angle, well, then what is stopping, and from neuroplasticity angle, well, what is stopping us from going, okay, let's say I have a goal. Okay, I have a goal. I have the rationale behind it. I should reach the goal. It makes sense to reach that goal. Okay, great. But now how do I actually make myself reach that goal? Well, what if you really look into what kind of emotions and feelings are associated or you would want to associate with that goal, and you use your mind and imagination in active meditation, let's say, to create that feeling, create that association, and attach it to the activity that you want to do and practice that.
Yes.
And what you will find is if you start doing it that way, at first you might see weird sort of doing that, but after a while, the association will start sticking. So the next time that you think about the activity that you have to do, you'll start going, oh, wait a second. I have a bit of that feeling that I felt when I was doing those meditations and so on and so forth. If you keep doing that, then you start acting, that it starts sort of a reinforcement loop starts occurring. And that's how you actually boost motivation and so on and so forth. Now, this happens, by the way, naturally, like usually, right? If you start doing something, oh, I like doing it. You have a nice little memory about it. You go there next time, you do it again.
Yeah.
Go there again and again. So it's not, what I'm saying isn't anything mystical. It's not magical. It's not even special, really. We do this naturally all the time. That's how we learn things. That's how we get used to things. You know, we fall in love with people and places, and we practice that thing with them again and again with those places. All I'm saying is you can do this. You can simulate this situation. You can simulate that environment. You can recreate scenarios in your mind with the emotional impact along with them, with the activity of your goal, and just train that. And after a while, you'll have like a background feeling for the goal in your mind, and that'll be your motivation. So you can manufacture motivation by creating these anchors and associations.
Yeah, I love that. And that, so that basically, you talk about the reason why high performing people, let's just say, use visualization so much, right?
And they use it
Also,
naturally, by the way. They use it naturally. They don't even like, just take a look at any like those, do it now, like these kind of almost, maybe sometimes they look funny and all that, but just try to see what their psychological character is. They're always very driven. The way that they talk is like they're very emotional in a sense about their goal. It's like, well, yeah, of course you're going to get up at 6 if you're actually that driven. So many people, like we all can do it naturally to degree, some of us better, some of us worse, right? And all I'm saying is, well, just take that and start consciously practicing it and you'll get better at it. That's it.
yes. And, a thought came to me while you were saying that. So I can imagine people, let's just say, what if they feel like they're not in touch with their emotions, right? So you might have people, let's just say, that spent a lot of time depressed and they are walking their way out of it through actually functioning in life, and then now looking for ways to thrive as well, right? And so a lot of times clients will come to me and say either I don't do emotions or they'll and I was one of them, or they will have allowed themselves to live in a very specific box of emotions. So if there's the whole human range of emotions like this, and let's just say it's a what do you call it? A line.
Yeah.
And let's just say you allowed yourself to experience emotions from like, if there's 0 and then there's infinity in either way, it would be like -2 to +2. And so slowly they are learning to be safe in the higher level emotions and be safe in the lower level emotions, right? So they can experience like what it means to be a human and and feel like they can handle that. Their window of tolerance is increasing as they allow themselves to do that, right? Now, so it will feel like, it might feel funny to them, a little bit awkward. Like, what does it mean? Like, I actually had a conversation with a coach colleague of mine, like, you know, they talk about like, you really have to have passion for what you do. And I'm like, I feel like I do, but sometimes I feel like it doesn't outwardly manifest because it feels like awkward and not me. And yet it's just because I just haven't done it, right? And so that is also part of maybe like the training of it, which you're saying, let's give your brain context of what that would feel like or what that would look like to be excited and passionate about this goal that you want, like to go to the gym, to feel yourself getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so when you tie that emotional intensity, which we know that that is actually a huge part of what makes your brain remember something, if either good or bad. And if you tie that beneficial emotional intensity, like excitement or determination or whatever that emotional feeling is, that makes you have that memory of like, this is why I'm doing it. This is why I'm not going to procrastinate on going to the gym. I want to do it. Can you speak to that part? Have you experienced with that with either yourself or your clients when you're not even familiar with what that emotion might look like, but you're trying to utilize this process?
Yeah, that can be difficult, and I definitely know this because when I started with all of these things, that's kind of where I was, and I remember how it's almost silly that sort of approach that I'm talking about now looked to me to me, because even when I would try it, I wouldn't really get it. And
Yes.
yes, there's something to be said about being closed off emotionally, but this is definitely a very multifaceted situation, and it's very individual. So there's you can only, I guess, say some generalization things about this. But one thing is, with if a person is closed off to the negative spectrum of emotions, so to speak, negative, he won't be able to experience the positive spectrum as well, because they're interconnected, and let's just say that emotional energy becomes trapped. That's a big part of shadow work, is taking those negative feelings, and experiencing them, and then you realize that they almost have a polar opposite to them. In other words, you can only become courageous once you sort of really explore your fear and you really feel it. Then you'll, weirdly enough, find a base for your courage, and so on and so forth. So one thing is to recognize that these emotions are part of living, and the only reason why we are afraid of them is because we are deeply associated with them and with the content of our mind, which again goes back to the difference between you experiencing this content, whether the thoughts or the feelings, and you being the one who experiences it. And this is something that, again, when I started, that difference is hard to distinguish. Once you put in some of that inner work, the difference becomes quite apparent, and the intensity and the fear of the emotions becomes lessened, because you realize that it's not the end of the world if you experience an emotion. It's just an emotion. So for people like that, I mean, if they have, honestly, because first of all, the question is, do they really want or are ready for that? That's the first question. If they are, and they want and are ready for it, they basically have to start exploring those feelings and allowing themselves to experience those feelings. I would say what would be very beneficial and what helped me tremendously is engage in any practice of self-regulation simultaneously while you're getting into those exploration of feelings. In other words, you want to maybe even start by learning to relax a little bit and then start exploring the feelings, because then you'll have this psychological safety net where you go, okay, I am experiencing a lot of turmoil right now. Maybe it's extremely emotional. Yeah, but remember that one time when I was doing that breath work or meditation or whatever, and I did relax. Okay, so theoretically, at least it's possible to relax. And having that safety
Yes.
feels like a good safety net, I believe, for people. And it creates that sort of a safe context. So you don't just dive straight into emotional work, but you go into that self-regulation as well. So yeah, exploring those emotions is important. Having a background or some sort of a safety net of like purely self-regulatory practices is important. And in terms of experimenting with positive emotions, right? Getting that motivation out. Yeah, I think it just falls, it comes down to allowing yourself to experiment with that. At first, I would just say experiment with all kinds of ways of doing it. There's NLP, NFT, there's a million, approaches to it. Just experiment with it and really notice that once your emotions get an uptick, ask yourself at that moment, are you more willing to do a certain action? Because obviously
Yes.
we do that thing just to get certain results. We always want results.
Right.
Just notice that. Just do your little practice and go, am I a little bit more inspired to do that? And the thing that you're going to encounter almost immediately, will go, okay, so I'm 10% more inspired. So what? Not life changing. And this is something that I have to say, but you can only trust me or not trust me, believe me or not believe me. But yeah, it's 10% because you have no skill at it. If you, over the long term, it can become 20%, 30%. And after a while, it can become like radical experiences. I had experiences where, you sit down and you get into that type of meditation, and it's like you're painting the most exciting painting and you're in the most creative flow state ever, and you're just full of energy, just vibrating full of it, right? You can get to that state. So it's only a matter of your skill that you're just experiencing it a little bit. Imagine what you could do if you had the skill to really amp yourself up to it.
Yeah.
That's where real transformation occurs. But it's a process. It's a gradual process with its own ups and downs. So yeah.
So it's almost like, are you willing to suspend disbelief? Because we know that we can argue for our limitations, right? How things don't work, etc. And we love to do that after we tried it like 3 times. We're like, it doesn't work for me. And
Yeah.
so, but like you're saying, so when you talk about like, the samurai or whomever, who used to, I mean, that was what they did. They would spend 10 years studying something or mastering or lifetime mastering the different internal ways of being, but also then of course the external, the skill sets, etc. And so to bring this back to somebody who's really struggling with procrastination, very familiar with, let's just say, the resistance that they feel, what would you say when you're working with a client? How would you walk them through? Let's just say they're on a call with you. How would you walk them through when you could just tell that they're like frozen and they're internally stressed because they have things they need to do, and they have a whole bunch of chatter going on, just like you mentioned. And so obviously that is just, it's a constant energy drain.
Yeah.
How would you walk them through that?
Yeah, it's a good question because, and this one again rests very much on the individual because the circumstances can be so different.
Sure.
That it's hard to give a simple answer to that. Again, if we had a simple answer to that, there would be no need for psychologists, and nobody would be depressed and so on and so forth. By the way, I come from a position of I'm not portraying this as any of this is easy, but I am definitely confidently stating that it's possible. So I'm starting from that position. I'm not like one of those tooting the horn of how just think a few positive thoughts and it helps. I've been in it for many years myself. So what I would do, because when you have a powerful resistance in you, there's a couple of things to consider. And depending on the situation, I'm talking with the person, which one would be appropriate, it would depend on the person. But there's one thing, which is a lot of what we perceive to be barriers are just like subjective interpretations. So one way to overcome your resistances is to really analyze, and this part can be done more rationally, so to speak, where you go, okay, well, what am I really afraid of? What is really stopping me? And even though that might not be the full fix, but it can lay the groundwork to go, okay, yeah, maybe it's not that bad. I still kind of feel tense, but like at least rationally, I have a bit of this rational safety. There's that element. Another element, which is maybe touching upon the clarity element that we started off the talk from, our ability to clarify our ideals, our values is it's a very powerful tool if done right. And when you work with someone, this is something that you can keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into, because once you, in other words, like the challenges that we have in our life, whatever they are, they're emotional, like the real life challenges that we experience, they're always in a matter of context in a way. Because again, like imagine you have to go 100 miles by foot right now. Why don't you go 100 miles by foot right now? Go ahead, go now. How motivated are you for that? You go, yeah, I don't really wanna. Why would I do that? But then if you go, okay, no, it's actually you have to bring important medicine to your child or to your mother or to whatever. You go, oh, okay, of course I'll walk out. It's fine, I'll do it. I'll get good sneakers, some snacks, and let's go, right? So it isn't that the challenge itself has some inherent value. It's the context of the challenge. In other words, the resistance that the person is experiencing oftentimes just indicates that they don't really have a northern guiding star. They might think they do. Oh, I want to make some money. Oh, I want to get a little bit of status, or a little bit of pleasure. I'd like a little bit of pleasure. And those things can be great in themselves, but if they don't have that real emotional charge and that real value and that real meaning to the person, it's not going to drive them. Because compared to the alternative, right, of whether should I just remain under this resistance or try to overcome it, in other words, you have to help the person explore what is their real ambition, what is the deep ambition, what is the strong ambition, and helping them discover that is what, in other words, it's one of those things where I inherently don't really believe in sort of helping people overcome problems or whatever. I don't think the problems are the issue. I think you just help people become stronger in themselves, and that all the other issues they can deal with them by themselves. And sort of to finish off that, these were two main, I guess, directions. But overall, I'm a very much, I'd say, a realist in most things. And in my approach, I'm not a big believer in magical quick transformations, which is why I always believe in just gradual, minuscule actions that might seem irrelevant, and for a lot of people they are. And isn't that there's like this great quote by Jung, is people miss God because they don't look low enough. And I always thought that's such a brilliant way of looking at it, and like a metaphor for many other things, And okay. I would top that off what I said with the fact that that sort of a person needs to experience and start valuing the little wins and accumulating them. And that is another good avenue of exploration. If you can't overcome the big challenges, and you know what, maybe you aren't capable of overcoming them yet, but maybe you can create or overcome small little challenges and start building on that. That's on the more practical side, I would say. This is combined exposure therapy / building up that resilience. So yeah, multiple directions that you can explore that. I guess these three would be the main things that come to my mind right now. Yeah.
I love that. I hadn't heard of that young quote. And when you say that, if you haven't seen God, you haven't looked low enough, you just mean like everywhere, right? Not
Yeah.
just up in the sky. You just mean like everywhere.
Yeah.
In each other, in the beauty of the world, right? Wow, that's actually, I really do like that.
I think it's very,
Um,
you think about it. Yeah.
mhm. And for you, so what you're talking about is actually almost, it is like self-efficacy, right? It's building competencies. And I believe actually, I believe isn't that one of our core desires as a human being is
Mm.
to, I mean, obviously we know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? But like the ability to feel like we have competency and capability to navigate our way through life, no matter what happens or no matter what comes at us or no matter what thing that we need to accomplish. So for procrastination, developing the skill set of being able to, like you said, almost get to that neutral state. When we're
Mhm.
in a very overwhelmed state, we can just imagine if there was like a, what do you call it, a thermal scanner. And
Yeah.
if we were to just imagine, and I don't even know exactly how that works in terms of what we're talking about, but let's just say if we're overwhelmed and there's constant buzzing and our heart's palpitating, we imagine maybe it's like red. I actually believe this is one of the exercises that you had me do when you and I were coaching. You had
Mm.
me do a lot of different visualization exercises that took me out of my head because I
Yeah.
was always there and invited me to look at things differently. And I think this type of thing was one of the exercises that you had me do, or a version of it, which was imagine the energy that's currently in your body. And if you imagine a color, what would it be? And often it'd be like red or black for me, right?
Yeah.
Imagine like, is it tight? Like all wound up?
Yeah.
And I would be like, yes, I feel very contracted. I feel very like, I could even feel in my body language. I'm like, I can feel like I'm holding my stomach muscles, and you would just invite me just to look inward and just to put like a visual so
Mm.
that since our brain does work in images, it just
Yes.
to kind of put a little bit that's not a thought that you keep thinking. It takes it outside of it so you can zoom out and be the observer.
Mhm.
And so if you imagine your internal state and you're talking about maybe helping to neutralize it at least at first, you don't necessarily need to even get to the higher level emotion yet. First,
Mhm.
let's neutralize it and you'll have so much more energy, period. But then you can train yourself in the, like you're talking about, right?
Yep.
But if you imagine, then it's like red. And then when you do your whatever self-regulation
Mhm.
modality you prefer, and then maybe it's like orange, then yellow, and then green, and you can feel it and you can imagine it. You can see like the truth of it. Like I'm definitely green where I was red before.
Yeah.
And then even like you said, bringing awareness to like, where's your mentality at now? You
Mhm.
probably feel like, oh, okay, actually, what's the next, like you said, small step to knocking this thing out that I've been spending days procrastinating on?
Yeah, and just one small thing about you mentioned, these colors and all that, and it's the point there, by the way, is to understand that your internal language isn't just this rational language, like I mentioned. It is a language of colors, of feelings, of associations, of smells, of touches, of all of that, and it's not about any specific technique, but it is about understanding, wait a second, there is a kind of a language. If I can create these associations and allow myself to just play around with these and look what I experience, I'll notice that I can affect myself in a way. And even though it's not like the only answer and just do this one exercise and all that, but
Mhm.
it is an internal language that can be used to sort of regulate as one of the tools for self-regulation. And yeah, it plays a vital role in learning to develop yourself and learning to regulate yourself, uh, is accessing that sort of a full language of your inner being rather than just always being in your mind, and trying to rationalize everything.
Yes. And I know I actually have kept you on for longer than I said, so I'm going to wrap this up. So many good things though, but to really think about it, what you're actually talking about, even though we were talking about procrastination, we're actually talking about, like you mentioned at the beginning, the fundamentals of how
Mm.
we can help ourselves actually realize we do get to, it's self-directed, like you said, not only self-directed, neuroplasticity, as you mentioned, but just basically this idea that we get to take a look at ourselves and see what if we could strengthen there, develop skill there, and even say, as you mentioned, just know it will be a lifelong practice, right? Like meditation isn't just like you do it and then it's like done. I mean, but it's this lifelong practice that we commit to because we realize just how powerful it is to be able to regulate ourselves for, so we could access the parts of our brain that actually allow us to be the creative individuals, the one that has the ability to access that belief in our potentiality. I mean, I can't imagine how much more like fundamental, what do you call it, strengths, or the thing that would set us up to be able to then do these other things in life that we want to do that maybe we've inhibited ourselves from doing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like my approach is I'm a very much a minimalist, and I'm very much about getting results. So this combination means that all I do is I just keep training my ability to just relax with any methods. Sometimes I vary them, sometimes go back to basics. I just keep training my ability to just relax, zone out, basically relax. That's it. Then I train my ability, okay, now focus, get excited, focus, bring all the associations in, and that's it. And that's all I keep practicing again and again, years after years. And I found that that's all you really need. There's obviously caveats to need this and whatever, but these fundamentals, any issue that you really talk about, whether it's procrastination, it's just one of the symptoms of a lack of ability to regulate these fundamental features of your psyche. And that's it. And if you just regulate them fundamentally, all these other things naturally open up to you, basically.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about minimalist, I can definitely see that. And I can definitely see for people that have been struggling and they think it's this big problem and they have to look at all the personal growth books, right? That there is definitely freedom and a little bit of relaxation there and peace that comes with knowing, what if you just focus on these things?
Yeah. And by the way, there's one little caveat, which is so interesting and it's hard to admit for everyone about ourselves. But the thing is this, if you go to the gym, anyone who goes to the gym and knows at least a little bit, just do a squat. Keep doing the squat, keep perfecting your form. You can do it for entire life, basically. And it'll take many, many years to even get to your maximum genetic potential. You're going to keep doing it and doing it. That's all you need. And yet we have an entire industry of magical diets and magical exercise. It's like, so it's similar to that, there's just fundamentals. And if you just master them, I mean, you're going to experience a lot of benefits. But sometimes, instead of just sit down again, again, now try to relax again, try to do the breath work again, right? We go, okay, well, I want something new because I don't want to put in the work. That's where the work comes in. That is the great work, just sitting down again to do it. Instead, we try to maybe distract ourselves with all these other things.
Because we're looking for a quick fix.
Yes, exactly. I mean, if you really want mental fortitude, people go, I want to be strong, I want to be confident, I want to be this. Okay, well, how about force yourself to sit down for 20 minutes? Nah, I don't want to do it. Well, what kind of mental fortitude are you talking about? This is true. This is the most easiest thing. You're not allowed. You don't need to go to war. Just sit down for 20 minutes. Is that hard? Yeah, but I don't want it. Well, then that is your fortitude. You're not going to build anything beyond that if that's a challenge for you,
Yes. And I think if you even say, what do you want to get better at? How do you want to experience your life? So for procrastination, let's just say if we're going to constantly be in this stress cycle, right? We can continue to go that route. Or if we at least invite ourselves to say, how would you actually like to experience being able to get the things done every day that you need to get done, or setting the higher goals and then doing the daily work that's required, compounding work to actually achieve those. man, if we could help ourselves and cut through the noise and, like you said, really focus on mastering these types of skills, the self-regulation, that type of thing, but also the mental training. I have you heard, I mentioned on a different podcast, positive intelligence, and it's one insight that I took away from one of the things that I was watching regarding positive intelligence was, if you imagine a circle, 20% is insight. So everything that we're reading, I mean, I read a lot of books and listen to a lot of things. I talk to a lot of interesting people. That's insight. That's just 20% of what helps you actually create the transformation in your life. And he said that's coaching is great, but if you're really not helping, if you're stopping at insight with your clients. And I'm thinking, I feel called out. And I feel like, but I know that was hugely helpful to hear, because it's 80% of what you're talking about is the mental muscle building, is the repetition, is the constant redirection, and we kind of forget that part. We get so excited about the insight of this could help us. And we get like, that's like the romantic version. And then we try it for a little bit. But what we forget is actually, and this is actually can be really exciting, especially if we have been the type that only we're focusing on the 20%, thinking what's going on? Why do I not have this transformation? Or why can I not sustain it? It's like, whoa, we have 80% we actually should be working with. That's going to be part of what does create that sustainable change. And I think that's what you're talking about. It is this mental muscle building. You're working in the 80%.
Yeah.
So that we're not hopping around all over the place looking for the next personal growth tool.
Yeah, and then there's definitely obviously very many useful techniques and growth tools, and all of that is good, but the fundamentals always remain the same, and they're not changing. And I truly believe they haven't changed in thousands of years, basically, in terms of this type of inner work. It's always the same. It's just putting in the work behind that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for spending so much time with me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your different take on things. I do think that a lot of us can get, myself included, a little bit lost in the weeds sometimes. We're trying to help our brains, but our brains are sometimes scattered. And so we're trying to put out some fires. And to me, that's helped my ability to know that I can. But where I'm wanting to get to, and I know my clients are wanting to get to, and I want to help them get to there as well, is to say, just like in basketball or anything else, let's start with the fundamentals. It was like we forget the fundamentals. And if we can keep coming back to the fundamentals, and like, instead of looking for another thing, go back to the fundamentals. Where are you internally? How can we get to neutral first, or calm, or whatever, and make that association and really understand the principles of rewiring, and really help ourselves there. We almost feel more grounded, right? And we feel more centered. And we, like you said, we do feel like then there's a North Star that we can keep coming back to. We don't have to keep looking for the next growth tool, etc. So I think you're doing amazing work. And I know that you have a lot of really, they're short, they're very digestible, they're to the point videos on your Instagram. But I know you're also other places. What is the best place that people can find you, to connect with you, and also to actually get a load of the content that you offer, and you put a good amount of time into it?
Yeah, there's mainly two places right now. One which is Instagram, which is more sort of a short form content, and which is Rewired Minds and Rewiring Minds. And then there's the YouTube channel, which is more long format, which is also the same name. So those are the two channels that I'm currently using.
And how do you work with people currently? I know that when you and I worked, there was one-on-one, but I think at that time you were also doing maybe some group. How can people work with you now?
Yeah, currently I'm only doing one-on-one. There might be some plans for group stuff later in the future, but currently it's one-on-one. So by the way, so you can go to rewiringminds.net and find out more about that for the one-on-one format. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I know that for people that are really actually looking to cut through the noise and actually look for results, and stop getting off the hamster wheel. I mean, you were instrumental in helping me through my times. And so I highly recommend that people check out your stuff and reach out to you as well. So thank you very much, Nerijus. I really appreciate your time and really explaining a lot of stuff to us that we might necessarily not think about in that way, but can really help us. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.